Hello, my name is Gary Mansfield, and this is the Ministry of Arts podcast, where each week I'll be speaking to a different artist. Now let's begin by bagging these bongos.
Yeah, right. Crazy.
Hello, and welcome to episode 224 of the Ministry of Arts podcast. Well, today we've got another in-person recording. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Zoom episodes, they're super convenient, and it gives me the opportunity to speak to people much further away. But you can't beat that face-to-face conversation with it bouncing back and forth, can you? And this was most definitely one of those. It was recorded at the Art Hub Studios in Woolwich, South East London. And it is with the evil genius, Fredrix Vermin. And this was another one that was in the pipeline to be recorded for absolutely ages. And it was initially meant to be recorded live at the opening of Gallery 32's Winter Sculpture Park, where Fredrix had an installation. But just as we was about to record, I got a phone call and had to shoot home. And if you've not seen Fredrix work before, think along the same lines as like Gavin Turk and Dion Kitson. It's that same sort of thing of getting the lowly cultural references and putting them in the spotlight, giving them a bit of gilding, you know. Fredrix is also part of Toma, the other MA that was featured on bonus episode number 32. And Fredrix is in a show with Toma as part of the Leon C Art Trail, which runs from the 8th to the 16th of July. So if you're in the vicinity of gorgeous old Essex, get yourself down there. Just before I take you to meet Fred, I would like to mention our Patreon supporters, without whom we would not be able to produce this podcast. If you like what you hear and you're able to buy us a coffee, then go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile. You'll see a Linktree drop-down box, and there's the option there to buy us a coffee, or if you're able, you can be one of our Patreon supporters. But if you're not able, that's absolutely fine. This content is free for everyone. That said, come and join me as I spoke to the evil genius, Fredrix Vermin.
I went and saw Charlie Peters actually after I listened to her on your thing, and yeah, she was talking about ADHD. So that was like how then she figured out that maybe she was, had a similar thing. Yeah, just chatting to her, then I was like, oh shit. Yeah, right, okay. Because I've always thought that I was like manic depressive, do you know what I mean? I was like, I have massive highs, massive lows, and get like this sort of, when I'm in a low, I get this guilt thing. So then like when I come back out of it, it's like, full pace, like doing a million things. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's like, I was like, oh shit, maybe it's just like, that's how I'm hardwired. Do you know what I mean? It's not...
And if you have got that and you're working on an artwork, obviously the bipolar thing goes up and down, not just today and tomorrow, it could be this hour and next hour.
Yeah.
Do you think that affects your work? Would you look at it in one stage and go, I was making this when I was feeling a bit down and it hasn't got the right energy, so I'm going to change it because at the moment I'm feeling happy. I know you wouldn't say that in your mind.
Well, I think probably like, I kind of... I really like processes that are quite immediate, so that's how I got into drawing, and then kind of stuck with drawing quite a lot, and then I did lots of work with like vinyl. That's kind of how I moved into like doing bits of screen printing. I mean, I'm like the messiest fucking screen printer ever, but I like it. Yeah, I don't know, I think I don't often return to something, and at the moment I've sort of moved, like starting the Toma course and then kind of working on these sort of McDonald's bits where it's actually, they kind of have the sort of maybe aesthetic of kind of like really recognisable imagery, but actually they're really personal. They're about like sort of my own patterns of like overindulgence, emotional binge eating, periods of not eating for quite a while. And that's definitely related to my mental health and kind of how it fluctuates. And, I kind of have this like heavy rise and then collapse and I've got more measured and balanced, but I had like a bit of a crazy year last year. And,
well, have you been? I know this isn't a mental health podcast or even conversation, but have you been assessed?
Oh, it
for
can be.
anything? It can. Yeah, just lay on that bench.
No, well, I had a major mental breakdown maybe like 10 years ago, and it was the first time it had sort of happened so clearly and so outwardly, and sort of ended up going to Maudsley, and then sort of was like home assessed, and then ended up getting a counsellor like in my mid-20s that was like really good, and that was through a charity for people with like surviving sexual abuse and domestic violence. And
is that what yours was related to?
Yeah. So it's like the thing that I found out last year is that I've got CPTSD.
Okay.
And that was like revelationary. It was like, oh fuck, okay, these things make sense. Like it's not that I'm a fucking alien. It's not that. And I sort of knew, and I sort of pieced bits together. It's not that I've been kind of, unaware of these things, but I just kind of never really, I guess, related it to myself. I never really made it a priority. I was always like, oh yeah, those things happened, and that was difficult, and although it's not my fault, it's my responsibility to sort of take that on and deal with it, basically. And then, last year, or end of 2021, had like a major breakdown again.
Oh, wow, sorry.
Yeah, no, well, it happens. Like, but it was like, a complete physical exhaustion, mental fatigue, like some really bad relationships, like usual stuff that kind of ends up leading up to it. But I think having the awareness of the time before when it had happened, that was kind of a harsher thing to go through, because it wasn't a new experience. It was like, shit, this again, and maybe this is going to be a repeating thing. And then I kind of thought back, and I was like, actually, my first like major mental breakdown wasn't my first major mental breakdown, because when I was a teenager, I kind of had a point where I kind of became really agoraphobic, kind of left school when I was like 13, but kind of didn't go much before that. And then, would sleep sort of 12 to 16 hours a day, and would sleep all through the day and then be awake in the night. And it was a way to sort of control space and have time to myself and stuff like that. So, I kind of realised that actually there's a lot of stuff that I'd been holding for a really long time. And actually this time when I had a breakdown, it felt kind of maybe more raw and more present, but that was because for the first time while I was going through it, I reached out to people and sort of had people, making sure I wasn't hurting myself and, those sorts of things, and kind of being watched, and which was really fucking difficult. Do you know what I mean? It's like being treated like a baby. It's like, it's so lovely. It's like, I'm really lucky to have some good friends, do you know what I mean? But it was
because most of the time people would do that anyway. Yeah,
I think because what it does is it interrupts that thing. Like, I don't know for you, but for me, it's definitely, I get on this real sort of cyclic thought pattern, and it just bouncing off the front of your skull, and it's literally to do with like how brain function. You know, it's send a message out, it wasn't received, it goes back, says it wasn't received, and it sends it out again. And so I can kind of really get into a point of like having really repetitive thoughts and like really impulsive behaviours that come out of that, and kind of the most recent thing that I've been doing is talking to myself, and not just having a bit of a chat like, oh, you're silly, but like sort of playing the different sides of the argument, and what's really good is then it becomes physical. No, out loud. I've got to do it out loud, and which is nuts. You look like a fucking nutter, but sometimes I'll do it on like a cycle, or when no one's in the house or whatever.
I mean, nowadays people think you're talking on your fucking phone anyway.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you've got your headphones in, like.
Exactly. No one thinks anything of it nowadays. Do you find that being in the studio, creating artwork, is a help or a hindrance to that, or is it both, depending on the day?
Well, yeah, this is the thing. So, I suppose I had, like, I say it quite often, but I had a chat with my mate Magic like a few years back, and we were getting ready for a collaborative show, and he was talking about his really expensive hobby, which was his art practice, right? It's like, you're sort of spending all that time paying to make work, put shows on, you might not make sales, whatever. You might not be that kind of artist that sells work anyway. And, just kind of feeling that thing that I think all of us feel at some point, which is like a bit lost in it, not sure where you're at. And I sort of really reassured him, and I was like, like it's important, it's about endeavouring to creative pursuit and critical thinking, and it kind of makes you more full-rounded as a person. You understand yourself, you understand other people better. Like, it doesn't have to be about the outcome or the external thing. And then I thought about it a lot more, and then I was like, shit, do you know what? You just got the wording wrong. I was like, it's a really expensive habit. It's like, for me, it's like, you know, I crave it and I need it. And it's like, you know, there was a point when I was like probably about 19, and it's like I was signing on, and it's like £35 a week. $3.50 of that I'd have to spend on a bus pass to get to the job centre, and then I'd use that day as my day to then sit on buses and go like uptown, sit in spaces like the Barbican and Haywood, and where it's like kind of free open space and you can kind of be there for a long time. But yeah, like literally at points like chose a sketchbook over like getting shopping in, just because I was like obsessed, do you know what I mean? Like just had to do it. And that's the point, is it's like as I've got older I've realised how to balance that and actually like prioritising, you know, keeping on top of my basics, so, you know, housing, eating, kind of trying to take some time off. But I think, yeah, so I've only had a studio probably like the last 3-4 years. I think there's this idea that when you tell people who aren't artists or aren't involved in it, when you tell them that you're an artist or you have a studio, they're like, this must be so lovely to be creative. And it's like, you know, I'm like digging around in my fucking guts, like, do you know what I mean? Like,
and no one cares.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, it's tumultuous, you know, and then the outcome, people look at it and it kind of doesn't necessarily always register. But the process, like, it's not always an enjoyable one, I don't think. It's an important one, but not always an enjoyable one.
Well, we're talking about your work, and for anyone that wouldn't know Fredrix Vermin, how would you explain what you do?
Oh, Jesus. I'd probably say that I've got an interest in kind of what it's like to live in a city, and I'm kind of thinking about things that are kind of disregarded. I've got like a real interest in materiality. And kind of what you can suggest with materials using. I'm not really a medium specific artist, so it's like one of the things that people ask as soon as you say you're an artist, they're like, oh, painting, and you say no, and they're like, oh, sculpture. Not that either. So yeah, at the moment, yeah, I'm kind of like really interested in like things that have become redundant. I've always kind of had an interest in that. Like up there you can see the fast gas bottles, so they're sort of, you know, like people do balloons and the gas canisters, so you get the little silver ones, but then these are the bigger ones, and then this is the thing where they're like, there's an epidemic going on, it's a real issue, so they're actually trying to ban them, so those things have actually become obsolete, and like similar to like green card in the back of Rizla, just because they see it as paper wastage, so that's kind of going obsolete. So at the moment I'm trying to scrabble around and gather every bit, but everyone's like, you know, they're holding on to their green card. So yeah, things that are kind of disregarded and maybe kind of like elevating their status and bringing them back into focus.
And why is it you focus on that? Is that a bit how you see yourself?
I think most recently, yeah, because of like quite a difficult trauma, you know, having a collapse, experiencing a lot of loss, and that sort of thing of trying to piece self back together. Yeah. So like that's what the McDonald's self-portraits are about as well. So like the process is like scrunching paper, and then it becomes really delicate, and it's like a wet paper bag, you know, so you're sort of like fighting your way out of a wet paper bag. Couldn't do it, I was so weak, like completely flattened. But like trying to stretch it and pull it and not have it break, but also having to accept the breaks and the cracks, and also suggesting this, you know, because with McDonald's they have that thing of like the fucking cheeseburger, right? You see the cheeseburger, everyone knows the cheeseburger. It's an internationally known symbol. But when you actually take a cheeseburger out of the packet, it never looks like that. So actually what you're buying is the idea or the illusion of this thing. That's the allure. Yeah, it's not the reality of it, right? And so I suppose the thing that I'm interested about in the bags is they've got the like factory line that runs through them, so you can see the points at which they connect, but then there's a disconnect and you can't ever quite get it to match up, because as you're wetting the paper it warps and it bends, and you know, so just sort of at the moment I'm playing around with that quite a lot. And then one of my favourite things to do on a Saturday night when I'm not going out is go and get a shopping trolley and walk around and pick up, like, you know, old rave signs, some of the canisters. Do you know what I mean?
Did you have art in the home or creativity in the home growing up?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. It was like at home was chaos, right? So my dad was quite abusive, and my mum was like a massive hoarder, and so there was kind of always stuff, right?
Was she a collector?
No, well, she was a collector,
or a
but also
hoarder.
then
It's
you
a
know,
fine line, isn't it?
nah, but it was like, you know, you'd kind of have something that was like passed down through her family or some shit. Like they got all this weird like hang up on who's gonna have what when who goes or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Like, but then you know there'd be a bag of shopping. There was like definitely points where it was like better and worse, but like kind of at its worst, it's like, you know, you sit on the sofa, you lift up the pillow, and there's like plate of food underneath,
Yeah,
and like
yeah,
you know, it was.
I know what you mean.
You know, I didn't have people around when I was a kid. Do you know what I mean? It was like not really a thing. So basically, my mum was an art teacher, so I would kind of go in when they would have like summer, and they were packing down the student shows. So it's kind of like I had access to those areas. Both my parents did art degrees. My dad dropped out, but when I was a kid, he sort of worked at the Royal Opera House as a stagehand.
Nice.
So there was kind of like, you know, like my weird uncle Brendan, like he's, you know, still fucking at it. He's absolutely mental. But yeah, he does loads of glass work. So I did some work with him not too long ago. So there's kind of always been people around. And my mum kind of definitely when I was a teenager, I think she could see that I was really struggling. And she was really struggling, but kind of been in this bubble. But she sort of, when I probably was about 15, was like, you know, you need to draw. And before that, I was kind of like carrying sketchbooks around with me and like sit on the bus, and I'd spent a lot of time because of the not going to school, sort of like I basically had mates that lived in Greenwich, so I'd go and stay at their house all weekend. Probably from about the age of 7 I was there quite a lot, and then their cousin lived in West London, so I'd go on the buses as long a route as I could take, go and spend like a couple of weeks in the night, nights in the week at her house, and then we'd travel back together and then spend the weekend back over in Greenwich. And it was like, drawing was a way for me to occupy myself, but also I was like, I guess, processing a lot of the stuff that was going on at the time. So it was kind of always about, I think definitely when I was a teenager, like, kind of maybe like late teens, started going to parties and events, but also like squat parties and sort of setting up big bits of paper and doing live drawing to music, and sort of sometimes selling bits to people for like birthday presents or cards or whatever. Because I didn't go to uni until I was like 21, so I went through like open access.
Yeah.
I had to do like a written English test, and it was like the most writing I'd done is like a job seeker's form, you know. And then all of a sudden it was like I think I got something like 54% on the test, and it was like 50% to pass,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I was like pretty chuffed to get in, but I remember getting in and being like, you know, what are people doing here? They'd sort of just like trod their way through the school thing, and to me it was like. The way that I felt about it, I was being paid to be there. I was like, I've got my own studio, I've got workshops, you know, so it's like I really, made the most of that. So, there was art stuff around when I was a kid, and, you know, school trips to like central London and museums and stuff like that. But
And what about when you finished your BA?
Halfway through that's when I had my first major collapse, and I've got mates in Germany that I went and stayed with because there was like no one here really that I didn't have any support, and I sort of thought like the level of anonymity over there, they'd just think I was weird and foreign. They wouldn't really piece together that I was like completely lost the plot.
So did you complete your...
Yeah, so basically I went out and saw them, and I was talking about moving out there, and they sort of persuaded me to come back actually and finish my BA, which was really good. Because basically, I managed to get first on my piece of writing, but that was mainly because of Neil Ferguson. So he's the one that I work with on Incon quite a lot, which he sort of set up in Brockley, and so he was my tutor, and then we've kind of collaborated since, you know.
Nice.
So it's really nice actually. And I think he saw something in me, like, you know, a certain level of critical thinking or, you know, drive, and that kind of wasn't really relating to paper. So he really kind of, you know, sat me down and was like, you know, you need to kind of get this through, because you kind of, you know, you're saying some important stuff.
Was there a point when you thought you wanted to become an artist, or is it just all merged as one part of your life, just merged into the other, and it was just always on the cards?
I think when I was like an early teen, I was quite confident. I mean, it takes a lot when your mum's a teacher to not go to school. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like literally, just people would be like, I'd go to friends' houses and their parents would be like, "What are you going to do with your life? How are you going to?" I was like, I'm fine. I'll be fine. I'm going to be an artist. And I was like really confident. But then kind of by my mid-20s, I remember people being like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was kind of like, "Oh, I'm a cleaner or I'm a teacher." And was keeping up on art practice, was like literally holding down like 2-3 jobs at the time to like keep making art. I think it's because I went to uni and over analysis of like shit work. Basically, there was like a lot of people doing painting, and then because that was understood and related to history, they kind of just got away with it.
Where was this?
So I was at Cass School of Art,
Nice.
which doesn't exist. It was a really good time to be there because it was like, there was a whole street art thing, which isn't really my bag, but like there was kind of a lot of energy, and there was a lot of people coming from international connections and kind of doing work on Brick Lane.
Yeah.
But then also you had like huge Bangladeshi community, and then you kind of had city, and then on the back street there was like warehouses and stuff. So we put on some like big events. Like when I was in first year, basically I said like, "Oh, what are we doing for our end of year show?" And the head of the course was like, "Oh no, you don't get an end of year show." And I was like, "Fuck that," So we went around the corner and just started asking. Like, and we managed to sort of pull like 60 artists in. We did music, performances. There was like a catwalk that ran through the middle of it at one point. And we had like second and third years coming up to us and being like, "Oh, can we put a bit in?" and stuff like that. And it was quite democratic. It was like, it's like 30 quid to be in, and that was to cover the bar and to cover the space, no commission. So it's quite open. It's fucking mental, hard work, but, it's worth it.
So at what point did you call yourself an artist?
Well, I still struggle with it, but probably like definitely the last like 3 or 4 years, I think since having a studio, it's my main thing that I'm just constantly doing. It's also like, I've been doing it for like 17 years or something. So it's like, well, if everyone else is calling me an artist and I'm making art, I must call myself an artist.
What do you think kept you away from it? That is?
I suppose it's then because you're attached to it, and I don't agree with a lot of it.
Yeah.
I feel that a lot of shit work gets precedent and gets promoted.
That's the same in
but it kind of has to be
creative
there.
field,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, you can go down you can walk past a pub and hear someone singing in there and go, "Fucking hell!" Why aren't they in the charts when you got that shit on top of the pop? Look at me showing my age, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. You were talking about the branding thing. So at the interim show recently for Toma, I made an art dispensary, and it was kind of like IKEA frames. So the drawings are more valuable than the frame, but also because they're in a frame, there's this idea of importance. But also because it's cheap frame, then that devalues it. So there's this like widening out and then shrinking in, and it was basically like a Pez dispenser, and it was made out of a shopping trolley. So it's kind of got this aesthetic of like kind of being a bit shit. You remember those like outside sweet shops and you put 20p in, yeah, that sort of thing. And actually they're quite like vicious looking things because then they'd like bolt into the wall and stuff like that. The price of them in the rack was like 3 times higher, and then you take it out, and if people didn't like it, there was like a bargain bucket that they could put it in, but you could purchase it from either one. And then I was taking them out of the bargain bucket and refeeding them into the top of the dispenser. And then at the same time I don't know if you saw, but I used the rave signs to make a little house. So it was like...
I did, and you was inside it. Yeah,
so it's like... I called it a Mandy house. And then I was sat inside it and I was doing drawings of people as like ice creams. So I was saying to them, "Oh, I'm doing portraits," and then I was drawing them as ice creams and then handing them out. And so then people turned up at the show and they'd got a free drawing, and then all of a sudden there's like a payment system going on. So depending at what point you kind of connected with the work, there was this whole deconstruction of the value of it and the perceived value. And then actually what comes out of that is the real value is someone's connection to something, and it's not about the price tag on it or the investment in, I can hold on to this and maybe one day it will be worth some money. It's, do I like it? Do I want it?
Yeah.
And then also making it accessible to people, And I don't think it should be in that way that, large institutions do, where it's a big amount of text on the wall that you have to stand and read before you enter a room. Because then that kind of becomes like funfair. I think it's way better to engage with it and go, "I don't get this. Why don't I get this? And I think there is that sort of snobbishness around art that you should have an immediate reading, or there's a right reading to have of it, as opposed to, I don't get this, is a perfectly valid positioning.
Yeah.
You know, if it doesn't resonate, that's all right. But I think it's, you know, those spaces can be quite exclusionary, I think.
What one of your artworks that you've created do you think's got the strongest emotional connection?
So, Pat Lunch that I work with quite a lot, and we've got a show coming up summer. She's like a really good friend, but also like a really good friend in terms of like a leveler. You know, she's just like, no, that's shit, we can't do that, or like, yeah, okay, we can go with that, right? And then I think it was probably 2000.
A non-critical critic.
Yeah. But it's like, you know, you just cut the fat, like you just get to the fucking point really quick. You know, we're both quite serious about what we're doing, but also definitely keep it light, keep it silly. So it was like an old school pub, and it was kind of talking about how pubs are disappearing, or they're a bar, everywhere's a bar, and the idea that, you know, I think Wetherspoons are the only real pubs that are still kind of going, you know. Yeah, and basically we made the Dumbbell, and it was run by the landlord, Argy Bargy, so we made a big model, kind of similar to the sort of thing that you might see like in a shit museum somewhere where they can't quite do a proper waxwork or something. It's like paper mache. You know, he had a salmon polo shirt and some like loafers on, you know, he's big grizzly bear, so he was kind of in there, and we sort of made it just out of stuff that we pulled out of skips, and then we used some like corrugated plastic and covered it in like wood laminate vinyl. We used the curtain rail as the bar at the bottom, and then we sort of invited some people that were kind of making work around bars, or like people that we felt were really kind of making some interesting work around like collections and stuff like that, the kind of stuff that you might see in a pub. And we kind of want to expose people and kind of show them off a bit as well. And I think what worked about the bar is, usually you have a bar at a private view, it's like the first place that people go to, you know, they get the piece of A4 paper, roll it up, walk around, look at it a bit, because everyone's a bit nervous. It's kind of a space that you don't really know how to operate in. And immediately what we've done with the bar is disrupt that. You know, people came in and lent on it because it's a counter. Yeah. It's like people understand countertops. It's like, you know, it's kitchens, it's shops, it's reception at the doctor's. Like, people get that that's a place where two people come to meet. People came up and said, oh, you know, do you take card? Someone asked if they could have a tap water. And, you know, it's like, it's literally made out of bits of tut from the skip. That it was like, it was so convincing as a pub that some people thought that actually was just, there is a bar in the gallery and it looks like an old school pub. And I think, I suppose the reason...
And what was the name of that piece?
So that was called the Dumbbell.
Of course.
And then Argy Bargy was an ex-weightlifting champion, and we sort of like made little brass models of him and that sort of stuff. And then we had bits of our own work in there as well. And I think what was interesting about that is to see the dynamic and how people interacted, but also putting a shift on it. It was really accessible, but also there was kind of clever social commentary going on. And then we kind of just did it as a weekender. So we both talked about how we were really sick of, like, you know, you have to work loads to get money to potentially rent a space, or you have to blag it and da-da-da. And we were like, we're going to do this really open. We're going to say to the artists that they have to pay some money, but that's to cover the space. Any sales that they make, that's on them. We'll help them to sell as well. We took on the hang, and then we kind of wanted it to be really active, because it's that thing of then, like, you know, people spend loads of money and time making work in their studio, and then they show it, and then they have an opening, have some people have a glass of wine, and then it just sits there, and then they have to take time off work to invigilate or whatever. And we were just like, we're not fucking doing that anymore. So, we had a meat raffle. So, like, meat raffles don't happen. I used to go to them at Quicksave with my mum. It was great. You know what I mean? Although I went to somewhere in Northumberland Heath. There was a pub, and they still do a meat raffle, and I was really excited about it. And then we did 4 burgers in a tin, a Greg's sausage roll. There was a burger place around the corner. They gave us like some vouchers or whatever. And then we had pub quiz, and then we did bingo on the Sunday.
Good.
And it was great. It was like a really nice way to activate the space. It meant people that kept coming back to the show and engaging with it. Some people came all 3 days. And And I think the reason that that's like such a emotional bit, I guess, is because it was like the move into being like, I can take creative control of this, and we kind of like really, we drove it how we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
It wasn't waiting. It wasn't, oh, if I make some really good work, some point Saatchi might come along and pay attention to me. You know, it's like, fuck Saatchi. Like, we're going to do what we want to do and how we want to do it. And actually, there was a really good response, and people were really positive about it. Made lots of money for people, and you know, it felt good to be supporting people. And then actually that led on to me doing the House of Parakeet. I don't know if you know about the House of Parakeet. So basically, because my mum's a hoarder, so what happened is...
And if you don't mind me saying, those are always rubbing off slightly.
It's a fucking mess in here at the moment, isn't it? I mean, this is the tidy version of it, yeah.
I'm saying, your collections are in order, but there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a fair old bit, right?
Oh, go on, sorry.
You've seen the gum under there as well.
Nice.
That's only recent. So the House of Parakeet was like, I'd been to Germany and then was like living away for a bit, and then I came back to London and ended up living with my mum again. And that was kind of like psychologically difficult, because it's like that space is kind of holds a lot of memories, and then there's kind of, you know, the family's quite fractious. And basically I had always had this idea. I was like, well, my mum's got this house. It's got quite a big living room. And I was always like, well, you know, I could run a gallery from the house. Yeah, and I thought it was quite a good way to kind of help her process the hoard, go through stuff, decorate the house, you know, kind of potentially like spin the narrative between us as a family in terms of what that space is and what it holds for us, and kind of bring a bit of life into it. So basically it was me and Pat again, we set it up, and we basically printed our own wallpaper, which was really disgusting but looked quite ornate. Yeah. It kind of had like intestine type stuff running through it and maggots, and then I do these things called vaginal orbs, and they were kind of around, and little bits of text. So we had that, and then we invited, I think, probably about 7 artists to come and do stuff. But then, again, with that, we didn't want it just to be a dead show. So we had my mate, who's Algerian, come in and do a supper club. So we had like a traditional Berber night.
Nice.
And it was Berberism begins at home.
Yeah.
We'd done things like made our own curtains and cushions, and and I think that it was the free reign, because it was my mum's house. It's like I was drilling bits of work into the ceiling, you know. I had a...
And she was cool with that?
Yeah, my mum's great. She's really, you know, it's taken a long time for us to have a good relationship, but it's really solid. And like I was saying before, I've like moved her into a studio now, and she's started making bits of work again. So,
do you know Richard Billingham?
No. Who's that?
He was a photographer who lived in a disruptive household. You know, I think mum and dad were alcoholics. And I'm not, you know, just the visual that you was putting onto your home with the hoarding. His parents were both alcoholic, cared solely for the bottle. Him and his brother were secondary, you know. But he started documenting life at home.
Okay.
And it's beautiful as it's tragic. Yeah. Because there's pictures of his mum and dad like just fighting over beer or wine or booze, you know, whatever. But his photographs were fucking beautiful from it, you know, and he's gone on, he's made his career on the back of them photographs.
Well, I think that's it. Is sometimes there's the idea that something beautiful has to be pretty.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And actually it doesn't. It's like, I'm really interested about that idea of like repulsion and allure, and how you can kind of push and pull between that space. And actually, you know, everyone watches a car crash. You know, there's something really, it captures you. And then it's like, if you're using those sorts of things, it's then what after. And so by the sounds of it, he's telling quite a personal story.
Yeah, I think you'd get a bit out of him if you was to...
I'll put him down.
And it's 1994 or something. His photos might have even been earlier than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, beautiful. And you was on about group show. If there was you and 5 other artists, past and present, what would your ideal group show be?
Yeah, shit, so I wrote this down. I wrote this down because basically I fucking ummed and ahed about it. and I went backwards and forwards, and definitely no dead artists because they're dead. They don't need it. And then I kind of thought about an art show, and then I was like, it's not really what I want. And so I'd probably do a TV show.
Nice.
And it would be written by Kathy Burke.
Perfect. I love Kathy Burke.
And then do you know John Wilson? He did it's an HBO series, but it's on BBC, and it's How To with John Wilson, and he basically walks around New York, and it's just really candid. He's capturing like all the weird nature of stuff, and then he kind of themes each episode. So he does an episode on scaffolding, and then he ends up at a scaffolding convention. Yeah. So
brilliant, I love that.
He kind of just follows stuff and carries it on. And
John Wilson.
Yeah, How To with John Wilson. Okay. Yeah. And at one point he ends up like on a mountain with a bag of crisps because he's trying to make it pop because, you know, kind of focus altitude, and then he can't make it pop, so then he rents a helicopter and he's up in the helicopter. Brilliant. And then when he's in the helicopter he's holding it above his head because he's trying to get, you know, it's like really funny, but also like he's got an incredible eye for capturing bizarre stuff. So he would be director of photography. And then ESG, do you know ESG?
Oh, mate, if you say that.
Yeah, South Bronx Tale. So they're a family who kind of a couple of them were addicted to drugs, and then basically their parents went and bought them second-hand instruments, and then they became a band. But they're like really percussive. Yeah. You definitely know some of the tunes, so they'd be in charge of music. And then art direction would be someone from Toma. So my mate Kate Sullivan. So she's a really good world creator, and kind of, you know, in terms of like a distinct identity, she kind of really can do that. So she'd be on art direction. And then do you know Tap Vision? He did the Four Lads thing, the big bronze recently. No, so he's got a really nice. He kind of does things like lots. He watches lots of old VHSs and stuff like that. He's a big collector, and kind of makes these really bizarre bits, but kind of. Generally, most of what I've seen of his work is video.
Is he British?
Yeah. But I'd have him on sets and props.
Okay, I was just... I weren't being rude.
No.
My phone, I was looking up. Ah, yeah. Yeah. I've seen him before, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Kathy Burke, because she's a funny cunt. So.
She's great, isn't she? Mr. 5.
Was that 5? Great.
It is 5.
That was a really fucking hard list to make, you know.
Good. I like the way you took
it. And then also me and Pat would be executive producers, so we're not part of the numbers, do you know what I mean? But we definitely have an in.
You mentioned Toma a few times.
Yeah.
What is Toma?
So Toma is the other MA, and it's an artist-led, artist-run postgraduate course that was founded by Emma Edmondson, and it is Essex only art-based postgraduate course, nice. I believe. Yeah, and basically she went to go and do a master's at Goldsmiths, and then 2 weeks before she got an email saying the course had been dissolved. And she had to look for somewhere else. So she went to Metal. So there's a few Metals up and down the country, but she went to the one in Southend and just asked for a bit of funding and said she wanted to do a course and set it up. And I think the first cohort, they had probably about 6 of them or something, and then it's been running probably since 2016. I think the thing that's amazing about it is it's really open and transparent, so they say where all the money goes. Every artist that comes in to visit us is paid the same, regardless of their status or position. Some of the people that come in and tutor us, like there's a guy called Ali Isa, and he gave his fee back into Toma. We can't, like, I think even more so than if you paid for a master's, which got paid like 10 grand for a year, and then basically write whatever you're writing on the tube on the way to your other job. Yeah. Actually, we get a lot of contact time. It's the evenings and weekends, so the idea that if you've got a full-time job or care commitments, if you're a young parent, whatever's going on. And I think that sort of structure, and actually, this year it's running for 1.5 years, and that's basically because through COVID they had to sort of delay it and extend it because of contact time. And actually they just were like, that works better as a model. So it's really open, it's really flexible. they keep the numbers small intentionally, so you actually get a focus group and you get to connect with each other. And I'm just sort of endlessly blown away. I mean, when I got my fucking interview, like, I was basically, last year what happened is because I was like, no, I need to really give this a go. I was just shooting out everything. It was like any application to anything that came in, I was just, yeah, okay, send it out. And then loads of people have started doing an accessibility thing where they have a webinar before to kind of explain how to go through the application process. And so I thought when I got the email that it was one of these saying, oh yeah, sign yourself up. And then I was like, oh, is this in person or online? And they were like, no, it's in person, it's an interview. And I was like, fuck. So, you know, spent a week crying in the bath and laughing hysterically and all of that sort of stuff. But it's, yeah, my interview, I haven't told you about my interview. So basically I was like, this one I was like, I've got to go for broke, right? So I decided to do a performance. I don't know if it's a performance. I was sort of like reenacting things basically. So, you know, I was talking about having to talk out loud to myself and kind of play certain sides and voices that are kind of going on. So I sort of structured it like I went into the room, sort of introduced myself, but then just sort of cleared the space. Then got down on the floor and then had a bit of tape and sort of was like marking out a circle around myself. And as I was doing it, I was like narrating what I was doing and then interrupting myself, you know, laughing, screaming. I was headbutting the floor at one point. Then I was singing, and then kind of the climax of it was then I started getting them to interact, and then I got them to make different sounds, and then they came into the circle and sort of sang with me, and then it was like singing Saturday Night. And then, yeah, and then we closed it, and I was just like, you know, I was fucking terrified. It was really bizarre.
Maybe they were as well.
Yeah, I think they were a bit taken aback, but I was also like, they're not going to forget me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was really grateful to be given a call back, and it's going great. We just had the interim show, and I think the final show is going to be, yeah, quite a thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do you come away there with an MA?
No, so it's uncertified.
Yeah.
Which is great. I'm kind of quite happy
But
about that.
I was going to say, it's as good.
I feel like
good
I'm
to
getting
you.
more of an art education than I would anywhere else.
Yeah, it's as good
Yeah.
good to you as an MA.
Oh yeah, better.
But yeah.
How did you find crits at uni?
Loved it.
Yeah.
I've just found it so positive. Even when people couldn't see what I was trying to say, then I'd explain it and they go, oh, I do get it now you've explained it.
Yeah.
It's just not working visually. So
Yeah.
then I knew I had to put a bit more work or do it a different
Yeah,
way
yeah.
to
Keep
tell
playing
that
around
story.
with it. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
crits, I
interesting
like
that, isn't it? Because essentially all we're doing is like putting more stuff in between ourselves and other people to then translate something. Do you know what I mean? To bring back that
Yeah.
connection in. Yeah, because at the moment, like with a lot of my work, I'm not really, I'm not sure where it's at or where it's going, and that's kind of rare for me, really. Because before it's like, you know, I'd make something and I'd be like, this is what it is, and that's what it's about.
Not know there where you're heading.
No, I think it's also that I'm intentionally keeping things afloat.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to land it too quick. Because there comes a point where it's like, then you just end up repeating the same stuff over and over again because you get it and you know it.
Artwork at a time, or
No.
do you have several things
No,
going
I'm
on?
working on a few.
Good.
Yeah. The ADHD vibes kind of don't really work with. Yeah.
Well, what would you do if you wasn't an artist? Do you think?
Oh Jesus, I don't know. I've done so many different types of jobs. I've done lots of like labouring, carpentry stuff, and I still do. You know, help people. There's a guy I work with building cabins. I've worked with other artists as well, which is quite fun. I like doing that. But yeah, I did lots of teaching.
What, collaborating or?
Well, lots of work
Giving a
collaborating, but
service.
also like, yeah. So there's a guy, Henry Krikatsis, he's got a studio over in Acton. So he does quite a lot of stuff over in Acton. Yeah, I've sort of helped him make cabins that have gone to like Copenhagen and stuff like that. And
Nice.
yeah, really interesting work actually. Like, you know, we scorch the wood and carve into it. So there's kind of like a creative element as well as just like interesting labour. And he's really decent, you know, he like pays me what I want and he looks out for me. He's helped me with art stuff as well. He's a big support, really. I've done lots of teaching and working with kids.
Nice.
Which I really enjoy, but I sort of hit a point where it was just becoming a bit triggering, really. And I was like, I can't be around that on a daily basis, you know. There was a couple of things that came up with some of the kids that was like, you know, difficult for them to be going through, you know, but it was the realisation that I was still processing certain things.
Funnily enough, I had a similar one with that. I'd go into prisons and do workshops, give talks, and then I went into a youth prison, which, well, just down the road here, but it's called ISIS. Fucking bad name for a prison. I went in there, and normally at the end, when I'm working with them, like we was all doing at the time, we was all doing, like, working on this pretty much a paint by numbers, you know, and we'd have a conversation. That's when the barriers come down and people would just ask honest questions, you know, rather than the bravado that goes out the window for some reason. But the lads would ask me. They was asking me different questions, and I don't know if it's because at the time I had a boy who was probably at the time 8 or 10, and I was with these lads who were 17, 18, and they're just chatting about their life outside, and I'm like, they ain't got a fucking chance when they get out of it, because they're going, oh, like, you know, my mum, you know, she's a addict, my dad, or whoever he is, you know, I don't know who he is, but I'm in here because, like, my mum told me to go and get some stuff, and the drug dealer's got this lad to be a fucking dealer,
little runner,
because of his mum, and his mum was pushing him into it as well, and he was like, I didn't want to do it, I wanted to go to school, but they made me stop, and I was like, fucking hell. When I come out of there and I sat in the car, I sat there for, I don't know, 5 minutes, might have been 25 minutes, and I was just like, these poor cunts ain't got a fucking prayer. And I couldn't go back into a prison for about 2 years after that.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because that's the thing, is like, I think, you know, even if I make it, whatever that is, you know, and I've got all the cash in the world, I'm not going to be painting flowers in my studio, do you know what I mean? I'm going to be making work, and then also, like, my dream is, like, there's the primary school that I worked at, is Horn Park, is like, go back there and set up just like some sort of cabin and just give them drawing, do you know what I mean? Give them drawing as a way to articulate themselves, and even if it's like 2 hours in their day where they can go somewhere and it's like, just kind of escape that, you know. I was working with kids who were like, you know, 9 and having to run stuff for bigger brothers and stuff like that, and it was like, fuck, man. Like,
I was saying that doing drawing for the kids, when I go into the jails, it's like some of the jails where I go in and do these talks, I can't go in anymore because the art class has closed down.
Really? Yeah.
Because of funding.
How's that the first thing to go?
It's not maths or English, which are the main things.
So this is the thing, right? It really fucks me off, because it's like when people are like, oh, art, like this like fun extra thing that you do in life. You take all that out, you take anything creative out. It's like, what are we doing? We're just endlessly producing and perpetuating shit. It's like, fucking people did this in an ice age. They like crossed continents on their feet and fucking then did cave paintings and told stories to each other, you know. It's intrinsic to being human and understanding what it is to be human. It's not, and it's become this thing where big parts of it are very commercial, big parts of it are very elitist, but actually the idea that it's not accessible for everyone, and you know, people aren't capable of it, or it's not for them, I don't think is right, you know. And I think that's to do with our, you know, societal setup.
Yeah. Well, as a response to them shutting art classes down, it's only happened to a couple, but I'm well aware that the art is one of the first to go because it's a pleasure and you can do it in your cell, is pencil and a bit of paper. A totally different thing, but either way, in response to that, I contacted someone I was on a panel with a couple of years ago, funnily enough, who's an art therapist, and she was doing it in prisons at the time. It would probably be in a year or so's time, maybe even a couple of years' time, but to sort out a programme of art therapy so that it can have visual results to show governors or even MPs that this is the benefit. They just want a bit of paper that shows actual statistics. So
measurable stuff.
That's what I wanted to try and do, give statistics, because I know that it had such an impact on me, and I don't know where that impact come from. It might have just been the stars aligning through loads of different things, but it changed my world.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that other creativity, you know, I know poets that have been to prison who are now, and they're a different person, singers, actors.
Yeah. Well, I think like the reason that I'm so passionate about drawing in particular is because it's like everything's been a drawing. You know, literally buildings that you exist in, you know, trainers on your feet, it's all been drawn at some point. It's all been worked out, and actually it's a really good tool for thinking. And I think it's seen as something for making pretty pictures, but actually it's a real connection to mind and ingenuity, imagination, and these are sort of seen as sort of nonsense things that are kind of, oh, you can be creative and that's separate to life and reality. But actually, like, all innovation has come from a point where people start thinking differently about something.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why I struggle to call myself an artist, because there is this idea that you're a painter or a sculptor, and it's like you're making pretty objects or things that support the thing that already exists. You know, it's like statues of so and so. And actually, to me, like, real artistic creativity exists in the point where people are flipping things on their heads. And so that can be in an artwork and proposing an idea, but it can also be seeing a material differently. You know, there was a point where, you know, sort of post-war, like, art institutions were sort of, especially like sculpture departments, they were developing new materials that go into industry, because what they're doing is they've got a bunch of stuff and they're putting shit together that shouldn't go together, so they're making new polymers and different types of rubber, and, like, you know, it's like synthetic rubbers and all that sort of stuff, like working out how to strengthen concretes, and, you know, it's like, that to me is like the importance of art, is not to make artwork but to be creative and, you know, push things.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think it's, profound. It's got profound, Gary.
And for anyone to see what you are doing, how would they find you, be it website or social media?
So social media, Insta spam is probably the best way to get in contact with me. So it's Fredrix.Vermin, and my website is fredrixvermin.com.
Perfect.
But also, if you see me at a show, just come and chat to me. That's
And lastly, which I've done these two last questions in the wrong order, what have you got coming up?
So I'm part of Art Hub Studios, and they've got a ceramic show coming up, and that is, I think, probably before this goes out, so that's end of April. And then I've got a show with Helen Ashton, which is also Pat Lunch, so that's back where we did the dumbbell, and actually they've the building's been sold, so it's our last one there, so it's quite nice. It's like where we cut our teeth, and it's sort of a return to that, and yeah, I'm quite excited about it, because actually we're just it's just focusing on us two and the work that we've been making over the last year or so.
And when's that?
That's June 2nd is the opening, and then it will just be for that weekend. And then after that, hopefully just take a break, because it's been a fucking crazy year, do you know what I mean?
Good. All right, mate, well, that's all my questions asked.
It's been really nice having you here.
Oh, been all right eating your biscuits. Yeah.
They're good biscuits, aren't they?
How's that? Very good biscuits. I'm about to have my fourth. Well, hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. So we wasn't dictated to by advertisers, we decided from the offset to go ad-free, which means obviously we had to self-fund. So we set up the Ministry of Arts Patreon page. And without that support, we would not be able to produce this podcast. So if you like what you hear and you're able to support the podcast, just go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile. You'll find a Linktree drop-down box, which will direct you straight to our Patreon page. And for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help keep us growing week by week. But if you're not able to do that, that's fine, because this content is free for everyone. But leaving a review on whichever platform you listen to your podcast, that really does help us get noticed, and anyone else looking for an art podcast. Or even giving us a positive shout out on your social media. Everything is appreciated. But either way, thanks for listening, and until next week, ta-da.